Now, Philippa, we had talked about, I think, remote working at the time of COVID. I just wanted to get your sense of how your experience has been having to work remotely, and what do you think is the future for remote work into 2021, 2022?
Good question. Yeah, so I guess kind of my reflections are, I'm a remote worker anyway, so kind of chose to join Propel as a remote worker last August, having obviously been kind of office based up until that point. So I think my reflections very much about it being the right thing for me, and I made a choice to work remotely. Obviously that hasn't been the case for everyone who's kind of been forced into the position by kind of COVID and the constraints around that. And I guess, in fact, I wrote a blog about it recently. I guess that kind of made me just reflect on why was it right for me now, and why might it not be right for others. And I think one of kind of my key reflections was I've got a fair amount of experience behind me. And so I'm not on a day-to-day basis needing kind of help with like technical questions, trying to work out what I'm doing, needing support organising my time, needing to be closely supervised. And interestingly, a kind of colleague of mine who actually heads up a website for supporting graduate recruitment in the UK, she said that they have found that graduates in particular are very unhappy with their experiences of remote working. So I guess kind of based on that, it just makes me think that whilst kind of perhaps us with experience in professional jobs, remote working may not have been too challenging for us. I think it's fair to say that there's people for whom the experience has probably been pretty stressful and pretty unenjoyable. And particularly thinking about kind of the graduate population. I mean, these are people who probably have just moved out from home, potentially living like a shared house with other people, don't have a lot of space to work separately away from their, perhaps where they sleep. So I think that for those people, it must have been really challenging. And I think particularly when it comes to induction, being inducted to an organisation, you obviously don't really get to experience a culture, you know, via Zoom, despite everyone's best efforts and, you know, perhaps sharing values on a slide. It's not the same as kind of living it. So I think there's definitely groups of people for whom it doesn't work. And interestingly, there was some data from the UK as well, where they looked at kind of tendency to work from home and how that was related to occupational groups. And you definitely saw that there were certain occupational groups who, you know, the proportion of people who've been working remotely has been increasing massively over recent years. So particularly what's called kind of knowledge workers, so people like us who use our knowledge and apply it to the work that we do, versus people in kind of manual jobs like service, public facing roles, where clearly remote working just isn't really an option. And I think it's very easy to kind of get a bit of a bias, I think, around, you know, we all do, based around the people that we talk to every day, perhaps the types of organisations we work with and types of individuals that we work with. Which kind of gives us a view that, yeah, remote working is the future, it's going to be great for everyone. Well, it's really not, and there's going to be people for whom, you know, it's really problematic or just not even an option given the nature of those roles. And there was a few things that I kind of uncovered, like when doing that research, was just around kind of personality traits and types, and kind of how that impacted on people's experiences of remote working. And there's definitely, you know, some things that we might expect, like people who tend to be quite high on openness to experience in terms of, you know, big 5 personality traits, are people who perhaps might be more open to working remotely. I think probably referencing back to Kay's point actually about psychological fitness, I wonder if, you know, people who perhaps are a little bit higher on neuroticism, when they're away from their interactions with people, are potentially having some quite negative self-talk about what's going on because they're not perhaps interacting with people so much to be able to give them the reassurance that they might need. So yeah, I think my general view is, I suspect for many people working in the types of roles that we do, work will never be the same. Like, I don't think that we're going to be going back to work in perhaps quite the same way we were. And, you know, my experience, which at the time kind of felt unusual, Kate, you've probably had similar reflections, like people do comment when you say I work from home, You know, the company I work for is based in Dubai. That used to be kind of unusual, whereas I can see now these conversations in the space of 6 months are really, really different. So yeah, I think for people in our kind of roles, I can absolutely see that, you know, the world of work is never going to be the same, but I don't think that is universally true, and it's easy to make those assumptions. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic, and I guess, you know, when things get back to normal, if they ever do, what is the impact going to be? Because I kind of feel now, and I don't know what your experiences are of this, but there's a few people I've spoken to recently who've been quite wistful about returning to the office. So there's a guy that I'm friends with who works for VMware, who are actually based in LA but have a big office over here in the UK. And he was saying that, you know, they very much said, like, everyone can work remotely, it's fine, we can have lots of roles where, you know, people don't actually have to be based in any particular office. But he's saying that's like what I really thrive on. I really miss my colleagues. I really miss going into the office. So I almost feel like there's been a kind of realization to some degree of, you can work like this, you can work remotely, it's fine. But then also a bit of, but it's kind of not what I signed up to. And actually there are some bits that I'm missing now that perhaps are becoming increasingly important over time. And yeah, just be interested to hear kind of what your experiences were of that as well, and whether you've been having similar conversations.